Hey y'all, Van Lufa here, going through day 2 of the Mollie Tibbets murder trial. This is a refilm because the dogs were crazy and growling and barking and wanting in and out and drinking water, and it was a little crazy. So we're just gonna start over, and then now you don't have to see my horribly frizzy hair. Okay, day 2 took place last week, Thursday, May 20th. The state's witness number 7 was Deputy Steve Kivy. He got a call about the missing person case when he was at home. He went to Blake's house the next morning. He helped organize a search for Mollie. He did investigations for the case. He talked about the search and how it lasted for a month. He also had obtained the surveillance video. He saw a black Chevy Malibu in the area where Mollie was seen jogging. We'll go on later a little bit more detail about that, the surveillance footage. On August 15th, the car was identified on the video, and on August 16th, the car was found. He encountered Mr. Rivera, who originally lied about his address. He showed photos of the car and the photo that he took of Mr. Rivera. Mr. Rivera acknowledged that a girl was missing from the town, but did not know the details. When the defense cross-examined, they just talked a lot about how Mr. Rivera was very calm that day and cooperative, and questioned why the cops did not search the car that day. Then the defense lawyer went into some big thing about how there was somebody named Wayne Cheney who lived where near Mollie was found and had a history of violence against women, and I guess why they didn't, push more about talking to him and, thinking he was a person of interest. Again, just trying to plant that reasonable doubt. He also discussed another person named Mr. Pexa, who lived adjacent to where Mollie was found. Again, more questioning their motives on that and why they didn't talk to him more. Mr. Rivera led her to the body and admitted doing it. Can't imagine they would need to interview other people, but okay. Then they talked about asking if Mollie could have had another boyfriend. And then he went off on discussing some type of a car accident that happened in a small town near there. And there was a female and a male in it. I don't know. It was, a Hail Mary thing. I don't know. He was grasping at straws, in my opinion. And then he just asked him about, obtaining the search warrants. On redirect by the state, they just asked him about his interview with Mr. Rivera and canvassing his job site. State's witness number 8 was Logan Collins. He's a 27-year-old mechanic, and he lived in Brooklyn at the time. He was the owner of the surveillance footage that caught Mollie jogging by and also Mr. Rivera's black Chevy Malibu. He had 4 surveillance cameras at his home, and they just talked to him about how law enforcement got the footage from him. They received it on a thumb drive, and then they just showed still photos of the footage. And they talked about August 14th was the day that they got that footage from Mr. Collins. State's witness number 9 was Derek Reeson. He works for the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, also called the DCI. So if you hear DCI used throughout this time, that is what it is. He's worked a few hundred death cases, and he was assigned to finding surveillance cameras in town. And then they did show the video that Mr. Collins gave them. It was from quite a ways away, but then they also enhanced the video and showed that. He also was in charge of keeping a log of everything that was in that footage just prior to her jogging by and after jogging by. So he had 4 people working on that, watching the footage, jotting down everything. After he received all of that information, he took it all and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. He said it became very evident that the black Chevy Malibu was very prominent in the scene during that time, And in fact, out of the 14 vehicles that were seen in that footage, the Chevy Malibu was 6 of them. So he drove around and circled around quite a bit. On cross-examination, they just asked him about the different people that were on the footage. Sorry, we are dog sitting and she likes to bark. Okay. Then they talked about a black pickup that was on that footage who was a friend of Mollie's from high school, and apparently he had gone and they assumed he had turned into the cemetery. They had talked about he had apparently a history of violence against women. They were just trying to, ask why that they didn't, get a ton of information from every single person that was in the vehicles on the footage. Basically, he said, this car was the most pronounced one. Of course, we're going to start there. State's witness number 10 was Michael Fishel. He's a special agent for Homeland Security for 25 years, and he also speaks Spanish. Of note, and I don't think I've mentioned that Mr. Bahena Rivera is a native Spanish speaker. So they had to use interpreters at the time, and even during this trial, he is sitting there with headphones on so that an interpreter can tell him that everything that is being said. He was told about the vehicle of interest, which was the black Chevy Malibu. He went to canvass Yerabee Farms, where Mr. Rivera was employed. And remember, Mr. Rivera had told the other guy that that's where he worked. So they went there. This happened on August 20th, 2018. The owners of the Yerabee Farms gave permission for them to be there. Mr. Rivera was there that day, but was driving a different car. I believe they said it was a Nissan Altima. Mr. Rivera gave permission to search the Malibu and his residence that day. He agreed to go to the sheriff's office to interview further. And again, Mr. Rivera said he did not know Mollie. On cross-examination, they just went on and on and on about how cooperative Mr. Rivera was. State's witness number 11 is Scott Green. He is a DCI agent, and he assisted with the canvass of Yerabee Farms on August 20th. And he was the one who drove Mr. Rivera to the sheriff's office that day. On cross-examination, they were asking him about the canvassing. Apparently, Mr. Rivera had a DNA cheek swab that day, as well as all the other employees at Yerabee Farms had cheek swabs, and they were all Hispanic. So what he was trying to do, I believe, was implying that there was racial profiling going on here. Because Brooklyn, the entire town was canvassed, and he said, well, you didn't swab everybody in the town of Brooklyn, did you? And so I think that's what he was trying to go for there. State's witness number 12 is Pamela Romero. She was a police officer at the West Liberty, Iowa Police Department at the time. She was talking about her interviewing experience that she has. She speaks Spanish. She's from Mexico, so she is a native speaker, and she frequently gets called to interpret. Law enforcement contacted her on 8/20 of 18 to go to the sheriff's office, and she did so. And then they just talked about how several times he had his cell phone with him and was able to use it, because at one point, the defense had kind of talked about, oh, well, you guys drove him down to the sheriff's office and he was 20 minutes from his car, and they kind of tried to imply that he was trapped there, and they were saying, no, he had his cell phone, he used it, simmer down now. Okay. She talked about how he was friendly and engaged. She talked a lot about the interview. He stated originally he saw Mollie running 3 times that night, and that at one point she smiled and waved at him. And he said that he was on his way to his uncle's house that evening to pick up a vacuum cleaner. He said he found the female runner attractive, and he was able to describe what she was wearing that night. And then at that point, he also said that he considered her to be hot. He was then placed into custody and then continued to be interviewed. Of note, he was placed in custody by ICE agents, and they did detain him for being an undocumented worker in the United States. The interview continued until 4:30 a.m., and then at that point, he led the law enforcement to the cornfield where Mollie was found. Eventually, he told her he saw her 3 times. On that 3rd time, he parked his car and jogged behind her. She noticed it, so she stopped, threatened to call the police on her cell phone. That pissed him off. He got angry, and then they started fighting. Then he goes on to say that he does not remember how he got her or that he even put her in the trunk. He said that when he gets angry, he blacks out and doesn't remember anything. He just happened to kind of come to in the car driving out to the cornfield because he looked down on his legs and saw one of her earbuds, and then remembered that she was in the trunk, but that he doesn't know how she got there. But he does remember getting her out of the trunk and walking her into the cornfield. He flung her over his shoulder. Of note, he stated that he did not have a shirt on when he got her out of the trunk and walked her into the cornfield because his shirt was bloody. He explained how he covered her body and then left right away. He also could not remember the weapon that he used or how she died. We talked about the bloody shirt. And then when she asked him, afterwards, did you think about this? Did you think about what you've done? And he said no. And then she said, when you'd seen stories about it in the news and things like that, what did you think of that? And he just said he didn't think about it. On cross-examination, Pamela asked him where she was bleeding. He went like this and, pointed to the neck. So she assumed that's where the injuries were. At that point, she didn't know. Well, at that point, they hadn't found her yet. So how could she possibly know what the injuries were? But she just implied or assumed that the injuries were at the neck because he said she was bleeding right here. And so the defense attorney, who was the female, stated that the neck was not consistent with her injuries. And then she was kind of like, oh, so you weren't familiar with the injuries? Well, she wasn't found yet, but okay. She was there to interpret, not like investigate the case, even after she was found, And then the lawyer talked to her a little bit about a false confession, and then kind of like degraded her for that because she said she didn't know a ton about it. She didn't have any specialized training in that, and so she had to point that out. She asked Pamela about the rapport building and the training that she had with that. The interview was 11 hours in total. And then the rest of the time today, on this day, they went back and forth about whether he was tired, whether he said he was tired, and whether he said he was sleepy, and whether he slept. And Pamela did say that at no time did he sleep during her interview while she was in the room. But they went on and on and on about it. I think they must think that he was really tired and, made a false confession. But anyway, that was the end of day 2. Thank you guys so much. Be sure to catch me on D Live tomorrow at noon PST with Uber, where we're going to live stream about this case. Thank you guys again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.